what I want to do in this class, and we probably will be able to reach towards the end of that debate that we're hoping to have, okay? But what I want to do is I want to really consolidate everything that we have been talking and go in detail so that you really understand what we're talking about. Because next class is the final class of this section, okay? And that class is going to be a debate. It's not going to be really a class. So let's talk about what we have learned so far is the answers to these questions, okay? The first question is it better to have PTAs or multilateral negotiations? That's a key question of what's happening in the world right now. It's a huge debate between people who believe that by moving into the PTAs, whether you call them free trade agreements, customs unions, whatever, you are really moving slowly trade in the right direction. And people who are saying, no, if you do that, you are really making a big mistake because the whole thing that was important was the multilateral process of negotiations. This is what creates the MFNs, okay? Most favored nations, and you will then be losing that part. The second question is really, what's happening in the world? At the beginning of the process of PTAs, custom unions were supposed to be the rule. That was supposed to be the most important way of doing trade. And all of a sudden, that really line of thought stopped and people began organizing regional trade agreements, free trade agreements. So you're basically going into free trade agreements, which went from bilateral to plurilateral, okay? Then the other thing is, why and how this proliferation, what does proliferation really mean? How has this proliferation of trade agreements like this has taken place? Why? Then the other one is, what do you mean by deeper PTAs, RTAs? As you move into the process, one of the things that's happening is, originally you thought about something which was trade would be just a combination of tariffs, quotas, all these things that we usually talked about in trade. And all of a sudden, you began having what's called a deepening of the process of integration. You not only discuss tariffs, you not only discuss goods, you start discussing services. And as you start discussing services, you move into a different world, okay? You talk about foreign direct investment. What should be the rules for foreign direct investment in the world? And as you do that more and more and more, you're going to be finding something which is quite interesting. As enterprises begin defining intra-trade as the most important element of trade, then enterprises are forcing the process of a deepening of the RTAs. Because if I'm going to be a bank, and I'm going to be establishing myself all over the world, then what I want to know is what are the rules of the financial sector. As I discuss the financial sector, I'm not really discussing goods, I'm discussing services. And as I discuss trade and services, financial services, I want to make sure that in any regional agreement that you are organizing, putting together, rules for how you're going to be managing services will be included, okay? That's what's called deepening of the process. You are not only discussing what was the traditional part of WTO, you are adding to that other sectors. And then, of course, as you move in that direction, the whole idea is they want to go into integration. And, of course, one of the major integration rules right now is monetary integration. So you have the monetary union in many places. But there is something that is not discussed in all the articles I gave you, which is very interesting. What happens when an economy decides unilaterally to accept the currency of another economy, okay? So what happens when Panama makes a unilateral decision of using the US dollar as the currency inside its economy? This is quite interesting because you are really going out of everything and saying, well, look, I'm not the one who's going to be deciding what to do with money. It's going to be the United States government because they are the ones who create and produce, if you're going to put it that way, the dollar. But I'm using the dollar as the currency in my economy. I'm not using the Balboa or I'm not using the peso, I'm using the dollar. Diana?
You have to adopt their monetary policy.
And that's a question that will be very interesting because it's completely outside all of this discussion, okay? You are no longer going into this. What you're going into is a completely different structure, okay? And what you're going into is Am I talking about integration? Am I talking about trade? And if not, what am I talking about? Why am I using dollar as the currency in my economy? You have Ecuador doing the same. You have Panama doing the same. And then a question for Mexico will be interesting for Mexico to join the dollar and have just the dollar as the currency. Okay, remember, they did that in the European Union. The European Union, they took a decision and said, look, we are going to be using the euro as the currency. But it's quite different because what I'm doing is I'm creating a common currency. Whereas probably would have been simpler just to say, we're going to be using the German Deutschmark and forget about it, okay? Why didn't they do that? Why did they go to the euro rather than the Deutschmark as the currency, other than sovereignty? So the answer to the first question, I want to go with you over this video, okay? And so let's go into that video.
Hello and welcome to WTO Forum. Today's topic, regional trade agreements. Are they stepping stones or obstacles to a more effective global trading system? Today we're fortunate to have with us two noted experts on this topic. Jagdish Bhagwati, professor at Columbia University and at the Council on Foreign Relations, and Gary Huffbauer of the Peterson Institute of International Economics in Washington, D.C. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Jagdish, if I could start with you, are regional trade agreements compatible with a global trading system?
Well, in principle, they are, because there's Article 24 in the GATT and now in the WTO, in which we allow for free trade agreements and customs unions to go through. The problem at the moment is that they're proliferated on such an enormous scale that they've become very much a systemic problem right now for the World Trade Organization. I think most people do realize that the scale to which they've grown, there are about 400 right now, that large amounts of world trade is now going through these agreements, which actually deny the most favored nation clause, which is about non-discriminatory handling of trade. So that is one thing which worries a lot of people. It's been, I've called it the spaghetti bowl problem, in the sense of lots of crisscrossing tariffs, rules of origin, because you have to identify which product is whose, and that gets very complicated. And I think a lot of people are yearning for simplicity, which is really what you would get with the MFN treatment in the WTO. So while it's legal, WTO compatible historically, it's something that's gotten out of hand. And I think a lot of people are worried about it now. And the whole question is now, what do we do about them? How do we make them more compatible, if at all it's possible, with the World Trade Organization? And many people are also worried about the effects of these very complicated arrangements with literally hundreds of rules which are all preferential. How do the small countries and the small corporations deal with this chaotic structure? So many developing country people, trade ministers, are worried about the downside for the developing countries, because the big corporations can get around the RMBAs, and they're worried about it, but they can surmount it. It just adds to the cost of production where I have to worry about all this. But it's not something which stops them in their tracks.
Gary, do the developing countries face disadvantages in a system like this?
I want to go back to first principles because I have a little bit different take than Jagdish, as you might expect, and as Jagdish I know knows. The whole purpose of all this trade system is to lower barriers, to get tariffs down, to get other barriers down. Now, we've known since Adam Smith that the best way to do that is unilaterally. But we also know from political economy that countries have a hard time doing it just on their own. And so that's why we have the GATT and the WTO. So each country can trade its barriers for the other country's barriers. That's already a step away from the best. That's good, but it's not the best, which is unilateral. Now, all these regional trade agreements are just one further step towards recognizing the political reality. And preferential trade agreements, free trade agreements, whatever you want to call them, they enable a couple of countries, 2, 3, 4, however many, to really get those barriers way down to zero in many cases, as has happened in Europe, as has happened in NAFTA and some other agreements. And, you know, you have to ask, what's wrong with that? The big goal is to get the barriers down, and these get the barriers down. They do it a lot faster than the WTO or the GATT has been able to do it. They go a lot further. They go into areas like services and investment, which the WTO has not been able to do. And they go to zero, as I emphasized. Now, what's wrong with it is exactly what Jagdish has emphasized, but I have to put the shoe on the other foot. The wrong is this explosion, this proliferation. As he's correctly said, there are about 350 or 400 now in existence. And there have been more in the last 10 years than in the previous 10 years, and so on. What's the cause of that? The cause of that is the very stalemated situation in the WTO. And that's where countries are turning who want to liberalize and get the benefits of trade, including many developing countries. So I finally come back to your question. This is the way they get there quickest. This is the turnpike method. And it's not the best, but it's sure better than keeping those barriers up at the sky.
Further and faster through regional agreements?
It didn't used to be faster, like the Chile one with the United States. Took almost twice as long as the Uruguay round, which was dealing with a great range of issues. Now it's quickened, that's for sure, because once people learn how to do these things, some templates get established and so on. So I think they've grown. Though there's an enormous growth of all kinds of templates also. I think one of the reasons why some of the developing countries have gone in for these is not because they're unhappy with the pace at which WTO proceeds, because in the end we are dealing with large numbers of countries, large numbers of issues, so it's inevitable that the amount of time taken is going to increase. Tokyo round was about 5 years. That was then we had the Uruguay round, which was about 8, a little short of 8. We've now on Doha gone as far as about 5.5 to 6. So we have another 2 years to go before we begin to worry. But that, I'm not saying we should go another 2 years. We are pretty close, in my opinion, to an agreement. But I think in a sense, this kind of feeling, which I think, I mean, Gary is absolutely telling us the sort of feeling which you have in among some negotiators, that this is such a hornet's nest, the WTO, that therefore we have to go the other route. But that is, I think, over dramatizing the slowness, in my opinion. Even now, I'm an optimist on Doha, and I think there are ways in which you could get it done. And simply saying that we retreat into second best bilaterals and so on seems to me to be a little short-sighted in terms of the impact it leaves on the system. I don't agree with Gary that any kind of trade liberalization is good. I mean, just like any kind of tax increase is not good if you want to raise revenue, you worry about what kind. And I think I would say that the downsides of many of these PTAs or preferential trade agreements, I call them preferential because we have to remember these are not free trade. They're not multilateral free trade. They're less than that, and they're preferential. So they're a different kind of animal from the rest.
Gary?
Jagdish is absolutely right that the time from the end of the last round to the end of the next round is getting longer and longer. And we would be lucky if this round is concluded 15 years after the Uruguay round. This is not an accident. This is not an accident. Imagine a parliament which worked on 2 rules. One, it had to get everything through unanimously. And 2, every issue, whether it be taxes, health, roads, defense, had to be in a single undertaking, had to be in a single bill. Well, that parliament would never get any place. That's exactly the WTO system right now. 150 members, they basically all have to agree, or essentially all of them have to agree, and we've got this single undertaking which goes across a vast range of issues. Now, when you have that kind of system, you have built-in stalemate. And countries want to get the benefit of liberalization. It's beyond doubt that liberalization, pays enormous dividends. It's one of the best things a country can do for itself. Mm-hmm. And they don't want to wait for 13 years to do it. And Jagdish is absolutely right. Chile took 13 years, but Chile did a lot of unilateral liberalization. They're a virtuous country. They did a lot first. But if you take U.S., Australia, that took all of 2 years.
Jagdish, final thoughts.
Well, I think when you deal with a number of issues, take my university, there are 3,000 professors, all of whom have a senate. We get things done. We have lots of issues there. So within the WTO, we worked out ways in which the 150 don't matter as much because they work through groups and so on, and there are natural coalitions which gets established. So I think when you think in abstract about the number of countries and so on, you're going to go the Gary Hufbauer route and start worrying like mad. Two, I think the developing countries among themselves can do things, and are doing some of them. I mean, there are a fair number by now. But when it comes to big countries like US or a group like EU, when they get into agreements, one-on-one, I'm not surprised it goes through fast, right? Because it's very uneven. It's not negotiation. It's actually a very asymmetric thing. So, and the part that really worries me, and it's the last thought, is that when you're doing that, and when you take a country like United States, which is, a very responsive democracy with a whole lot of lobbying groups and so on, we managed to put in all kinds of extraneous issues which then muddy up the trade picture. And my worry is that a lot of developing countries are with EU or US, and particularly US, which is much more responsive, that you are actually signing on to a variety of things which are going to remain with you. And the preferential advantage you have in the American market is one which is going to erode over time. The more, because Doha is bound to succeed, there'll be another round. So I think the developing countries are the ones I really worry about much more. First, because of the spaghetti bowl problem, and two, they're signing on to things. And in aid, we've learned that if you get somebody calls it an aid program, and when you actually you're being ripped off. We've learned that. So now with trade, we have to again be be careful. What are you buying into? It looks like you're getting entry into the U.S. market, but it will go through fast, right? But I think caveat emptor, buyer beware, is something that many developing countries are beginning to worry about now.
Gary Hufbauer, you have the last word.
I just would like to make 2 points. I do worry about the developing countries, but I worry about the small developing countries. I think it's an outrage right now that India is one of the blocking powers in this Doha round, but India is willing to reduce its tariffs to zero in a deal with the European Union. India doesn't have a problem. I think it's not benefiting the multilateral system, but India is a developing country which can take care of itself. Could I say that of Bangladesh? Probably not. The second point, and here I think Jagdish and I are absolutely in agreement, is that the regional and the multilateral system are both here to stay. The regionals are here to stay. Nobody thinks they're going away. And the challenge ahead, which was the challenge of this 2.5 day conference we just had, is how you can mesh the regionals, how you can get over these rough edges, how you can bring in these small developing countries and give them a fair shake. That's really the challenge of the next decade.
Two different points of view on regional trade agreements. I'd like to thank our guests, Gary Hufbauer and Jagdish Bhagwati, and thanks to you for watching WTO Forum.
Okay, what you have just seen is a debate among probably two of the top guys in this area, okay? One of them is Jagdish Bhagwati. He's a professor at Columbia University, and he's probably the best theoretician and practitioner in the area of trade today, okay? So if you really want to specialize in trade at some point, Columbia University, Jagdish, if he's still around, will be the right person to be with. And the other one is Gary Hufbauer, who works at a place called the Peterson Institute, which is the most important think tank in terms of the private sector views of how things should be happening in an economy. And if you look at this discussion, there are several points I would like to make with you. One of them is, okay, if we are looking at trade right now, and if we thought about the system that was created in 1947, what is happening that has made a huge change both in terms of how the United States looks at trade in the world and how the rest of the world looks at trade in the world? The biggest promoter of worldwide trade, MFN rules, was the United States in the 40s and 60s of last century. The biggest challenger of that today is the United States along with the European Union, because what they are doing right now is completely different from what they were planning to do in the 40s, 50s, 60s of the past century. So is this a political issue? Why will it be a political issue? How do you think it is? Do you think it's really a trade issue, or do you think it's a political issue that is pushing this dimension to RTAs, PTAs, other things? Say whatever you feel. Is it political?
To stimulate trade?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the discussion, one of the points that Jarvis is talking about is the fact that big countries can impose to small countries many decisions. And the small countries tend to accept that as part of the process one-on-one, bilateral relationship. Let's say that you're making a trade agreement between the United States of America and Costa Rica, okay? So let's look at the size of the two economies in the two countries. Here you have a country of about 300 million people, the biggest economy in the world, hugely diversified, and you have on the other side Costa Rica, a nice country, very intelligent, very well-prepared people, about 2 million, 2.5 million people, depends whether you put there all the Nicaraguans who have come to Costa Rica. If you put all these things together, the size of this economy and the size of this economy is really mismatched. So this economy, this country can impose on this small economy. Is that a political issue? If it is political, as Jacques is saying, one of the reasons why it's becoming political is because inside this country called the United States, you have a democratic system. In a democratic system, interest groups are going to be negotiating to have benefits. And so when the government of this country negotiates with the government of another country a trade agreement, you will have all this political situation in the big country, if it is a democracy, pushing in one direction. And so you will have interest groups saying, don't do that, don't go into this other sector, or request or demand these things to provide the small country. So the concern about what is political issues may be leading the process of negotiating. And in that process of negotiating, the small countries may take a decision that may be the wrong decision over the long run, because they accept things that later on they are not capable of fulfilling. But they want to get into this relationship. That's why he doesn't like that, because he thinks that we are creating a situation where this is not helpful, okay? It's not helpful to trade, but it's not helpful to developing countries. And then the other guy comes back and says, well, developing nations are the ones who really are blocking the overall multilateral trade. India is to be blamed. I don't know whether it's making reference because Jagdish is Indian, but the point made is India, and it's true, India is one of the biggest countries which is creating blocks for the process of multilateral negotiation. And they are very concerned about their own agricultural sector, okay? Why is India concerned about the agricultural sector? Because the largest number of people in India live in the agricultural sector, and therefore any negotiation where they will liberalize trade on agricultural goods will become very complicated, politically speaking, for the government to handle. Are then political considerations leading the negotiations, or are economic considerations? Yes. Montserrat, you raise your hand.
Well, I wanted to ask something. Like, well, I thought it's also because United States and European Union, they are taking care of the power, right? Like they are like building some kind of blocks. So like if they allow more developing countries to participate more in trade, they're going to lose power. So I think that's the reason why it's political. I don't know. Because of the power.
But then what we're talking about is it possible really to separate the political part from the economic part? And if it is not possible, then it makes a lot of sense what has been happening in the world. Because in the end, yes, we all agree, and this is the basic theory, that if we go into multilateral negotiations, if we really go and open the economy in a way that can be unilateral, or that we make a negotiation where everybody gains, that's the best possibility. But looking at the reality, the reason why you have this large number of RTAs is because, in fact, you are moving more and more into a political process of what can I gain. Now, if you look at Hubare, what he says during the discussion is, what is the purpose of this thing? Isn't it to reduce tariffs? Isn't it to increase trade? Isn't that what's happening with the RTAs? And so if it is happening, why do you find any fault on it? Then this is the right way to do it. Well, let me tell you, this is a big discussion, and one of the points that was very interesting when we were negotiating the Doha round in Cancun was the whole process of talking what are really the benefits for small countries, for developing countries. What are the concessions that the big countries are willing to provide? But the negotiation cannot take place in that relationship, because what happens is, if I want to be in agreement with all of you at the same time, and all of you have the right to veto any agreement, then it becomes very complicated to reach a general multilateral agreement, okay? Just imagine, this is exactly what Gary was saying in the conversation. Imagine that I have a parliament, and the only way that you can get a bill out of that parliament is if it fulfills two conditions. The first condition is that everybody has to be in agreement. Okay, this is not majority rule. This is all or none. And the second is, whatever we are discussing, she may be interested in one particular area of trade, I may be interested in another particular area of trade, they may be interested in another particular area of trade, and so we start negotiating all these things, one-on-one, two-on-two, whatever. Once we have reached that agreement, we have to bring them into the overall package, and it is a single undertaking. That's the name that is used, single undertaking. Everything goes in, and everything has to be accepted. So these two things make negotiations WTO very complicated. The first one, because you have to put everybody in agreement. Okay, so you can cajole people, push them, do a lot of things, and you do all that during the negotiations. But the other problem is, and I have to include everything, and it has to be everything in the package. So if you and I are negotiating something differently, it has to be in the package. Well, what it has led to is to say, well, you know what? This is going to take 18 years. You know where the Doha round started? The latest round of negotiations on the multilateral phase with WTO? You have no idea? Okay, it started in the year 2000, basically. And so what we're talking about is, this is 2013. Are we closer or farther? Well, let me tell you. We held the meeting of ministers in Mexico, in Cancun, in the year 2003. And we reached no agreement. Everybody said that it was a mistake, that we find an agreement. This is 2003, 2013, 10 years, nothing has happened. If you add the 3 years, or the 2 years, 2001, 2002, of negotiations, you have a round that has gone by for 12 years, and nothing has happened. In between, you have all these RTAs, FTAs, everything is happening, okay? So that's the whole point made there. So the first thing is, of course, politics counts. The second question is, what about enterprises? Of course they count, okay? And one of the things that you're facing more and more in the world is businesses participating in this negotiating, but also creating conditions that will be required for them for two reasons. One is, I want to make business in other countries, and I want to make sure that I have a solid framework, legal framework, for whatever investment I do in those countries. And the second thing, which is very interesting right now, is as I go into this integration of production processes, I want to make sure that the same rules for my integration process, for my sector, take place in the countries that I'm interested in. So I'm going to be pushing particularly the countries, the multinational companies, are going to be pushing for these regional agreements because they need that as a framework to do business. And there are more and more multinationals, okay? And of course, as I am an enterprise, my realm of activity is not only production of goods, it's also production of services. So what I'm going to be pushing is for more investment and more services. Is this economic or political? And this is the question. I don't know, okay? Because in the end, a large company can really influence the politics of a place substantially, okay? It's not the same to say, okay, here we have a company called whatever, Boeing Corporation. If Boeing Corporation really wants to put a plant, let me put it this way, better example. Intel, you know what Intel produces, yeah? When you use your computers, those are the things that make your machine run right, okay? Intel was trying to define where will they put one of the largest companies, production factories they have. In the end, it didn't come to Mexico, it went to Costa Rica. And the reason is because they could really influence much more what they will get from Costa Rica than from Mexico. So they established up in Costa Rica. In so doing, Intel became the largest exporter of that country and therefore has a very strong influence in that country. Now you may say, well, the democracy of Costa Rica, and that's true. But because they have this large say in the amount of resources that Costa Rica will get as exchange for exports, then it has become one of the largest, the largest employer of the country and the largest earner of foreign currency in the country. And therefore, they can have influence in that country, okay? So yes, I think it's business, but at the same time, there is going to be some politics included in the whole process. And so the multinational corporations cannot impose conditions as easily in a multilateral framework as they can in a bilateral framework. All of this has to be taken into consideration, and is the reason why we have seen this transformation from WTO, GATT, if you want to call it that way, into WTO, and in that transformation, we have all these preferential trade agreements, regional trade agreements taking place. So the second question was, what's the difference between a free trade agreement and the customs union? Now, you are supposed to have read these things, and the reason why I'm doing this right now with you is because I imagine that you have done it, but not as much as you should, and so let's do it quickly together, okay? Look at what Ann Kruger says. She starts saying historical preferential trade agreement arrangements were widespread. Most favored nation, this is the whole point. Practices that don't become predominant until the 20th century. So what we are talking about free trade, even though from Adam Smith we began doing it, in fact, didn't really take place until the 20th century. Okay? That's when we really became pretty much all this structure that happens after the World War II. But look at what she says there. She says, a dispute between the United States, which favor universal MFN practices, and Britain, where the preservation of the Commonwealth preferences was important, led to the adoption of Article 24 of the GATT agreement. Under Article 24, countries may enter into preferential trading arrangements provided that, 1, the preference is 100%, trade included. Second, preference covers substantially all aspects of trade. And 3, the average tariff barrier against third countries is no higher after customs union than before. We talk about that, okay? These are the rules of Article 24, which provide the exception under which we move from multilateral trade to regional trade. So what the article of Ann Kruger is going to be telling us is how this transformation takes place and how a country like the United States, which originally was fully for free trade all over the world and multilateral negotiation process, has now transformed into a different animal. Because everything starts in this article. This is an old article, and it starts when NAFTA is being negotiated. And what she's looking at right there is the United States has switched from a country that was looking for multilateral trade agreements to a country that is now going bilateral in its trade agreements. But think about this phrase. This is what's important, okay? This is the way I'm going to be making the questions in the exam that you're going to be having in the 27th. Don't forget. So the first is Commonwealth preferences. What's the meaning of that? When you read an article, you have to think. You don't just read, okay? Most of us just read. You know, it's just like a computer, garbage in, garbage out. So what you have to do is you have to think. What she's telling you is one thing which is very important. Britain, because it had all this empire and had evolved into what is called the Commonwealth of countries, have many rules and regulations for trade that will favor the countries on that Commonwealth. Okay? That was part of the empire. That was part of the whole thing. Remember, the Queen of England is, or was until recently at least, also the Queen of Canada and the Queen of this, and that's the head of state of all these countries, because they are the Commonwealth of Nations of the United Kingdom. Okay? So all of a sudden, what you find is, if I'm going to be discussing how should I make trade, then the biggest problem I'm going to be facing is if I am part already of a Commonwealth, if I'm part of a common market, if I'm part of a customs union, I'm going to be defending that. Because there are interests that are part of my thing. At the end of the war, that was really the situation. The Americans coming and saying, we have to open for everybody, and the British saying, wait a minute, I have a Commonwealth and we have to defend what is inside the Commonwealth. And therefore, in the negotiating process of these two concepts, you ended up with Article 24 of the GATT Agreement, which opened the door for regional trade agreements. In negotiating a situation where Britain and the United States, the two most powerful at the time in terms of the negotiating process. Not true, because the United States was richer and stronger, but anyway, at that point they were negotiating as equals. The British were able to bring Article 24 into the rule, opening the door for the process of GATT moving into regional trade agreements and preferential. If I'm going to be doing that, at the time the preference really was a customs union. Okay? And that's really what Anne Kruger is telling you. And she says, what is that? Well, it's a market with a common external tariff among members and free mobility of factors of production, and has since become increasingly integrated with the objective of becoming a single market. At the time that she's writing, 97, this is the concept, okay? It makes a lot of sense to go into customs unions. And what she does there is start telling you, look at the European Union. It evolved from multilateral liberalization of trade barriers, so the external tariffs were greatly reduced, even as tariffs and other trade barriers were dismantled among the members. Other efforts to form preferential trade arrangements and emulate the Europeans were mostly among developing countries. And so you have a lot of things that we're going to be reviewing later on in class happen during this period. And so you have the Southern African Customs Union, okay, which is part of the Southern African, South Africa with Zimbabwe, with other countries. And the whole thing that she's making is, were usually free trade agreements and generally failed. Okay? It was not easy to make those things. So she says, well, given the United States commitment to MFN principles and the apparent reality that Europe was integrating, the trading system was increasingly multilateral. In the post-war years, therefore, analysis of preferential trading arrangements centered largely on customs unions. Because that was the process. We're making a customs union at that time. What you're going to see later on in the other article that I asked you to read is that there are very few customs unions anymore. No more than 8% of the whole trade agreements that we have in the world are customs unions. So what she says is most analysis of customs unions focus on the effects of member countries and on the rest of the world. Okay? Analysis with the recognition that formation of a customs union was second best You know what second best means? This is pretty much economist jargon. You know what second best is? Okay, what is the first best? So think about your life and say, I would like to be super rich. That's my objective in life. I want to be as rich as Steve Jobs was.
Second best is your opportunity.
Second best is, okay, I didn't make it that way, but if it's going to be second best, at least I want to have a car, a house, this and that. That's second best. Because I'm going to be happy, but I will be happier if I had all that money, but I'm going to be happy. So I have to settle for a second best. Yeah? I mean, you know, when one is young, you know, one says, what kind of husband or wife do I want? And you make all the characteristics. Right? At the end of the story, you look at the one that you marry with and you say, okay, this is exactly what I thought. Okay, this is exactly what I thought. Okay, great. But if not, you're going to say, as I age, I become more reasonable. I understand that these things are not going to happen, okay? And therefore, this is the kind of person that I understand should be. At that point, your second best becomes your optimal and your best, okay? Because then you understand reality. Economists say that the optimal solution is what we call a Pareto optimal, where you will reach a point where nothing that you can do will make things better. Anything you do will make things worse. That's the Pareto optimal. Second best is, if I cannot reach that, what is the next solution that will approach me closest to the optimal solution? And I will have to settle for a second best. The best solution is multilateral trade. But since that is not happening because of all these restrictions, the second best solution is a customs union. Okay? And so, accepting that concept, what people were saying is, you are moving from a tariff-ridden situation to a free trade situation. Okay? And at least you are doing it by creating custom unions where trade is free, things are happening better. The second best solution. However, she says, since the early 1980s, free trade agreements, especially the NAFTA, which is the one that really created all this noise, have emerged. According to official pronouncements, NAFTA is to be enlarged to become the Western Hemisphere FTA. This is the thinking in the 90s. NAFTA was going to be the example, and then we will become something there. And she goes on and says, countries participating in APEC have announced that they will have free trade by the year 2010 for developed and 2020 for developing countries. Go and check. But what I want you to understand is the debate that we're going to have next class is going to be on these issues, okay? So I'm going to be assigning now to the teams. And people will have to say, does it really make more sense to go to NAFTA and integrate ourselves as a whole region? Or doesn't? What are the benefits for a country like Mexico of doing that? Can we understand those benefits? Does it make sense? Are we going to be dependent on what? What are we going to be doing if we move into that direction? We are going to be giving up sovereignty. If I'm going to be using the dollar as the common currency, I'm giving up sovereignty. What is the sovereignty I'm losing? I don't have control of my monetary policy. Okay? It's now going to be defined by the Federal Reserve Bank of the United States. Am I willing to do that? What are the benefits if I do that? So the whole process that we're talking about is that concept. And she said in this one, despite increased interest that NAFTA arrangements have provoked, there has been little analysis of different types of preferential arrangements, and in particular free trade agreements in contrast to customs union. So her article is exactly that point, okay? It's the discussion between the two things. And she uses this very strong concept from an economist's point of view. A free trade arrangement can yield no benefits that are not attainable under a customs union. and can generate additional welfare costs that are not incurred under a customs union. Therefore, all else equal, customs union arrangements are strictly Pareto superior to free trade agreements. Now, why do you think that's true? What she's saying to you is, look, the best solution, the optimal Pareto solution is multilateral free trade agreements. That's not happening, so we're going to move into bilateral or plurilateral agreements. I have two options here. I can do a free trade agreement or I can do a customs union. And what she's saying is, customs union is much better than a free trade agreement. On a Pareto condition, this is going to create more welfare for the world than this other one. So why is it then, and this is the question that our colleagues are going to be answering next class, that we want to go with a free trade agreement with NAFTA rather than a customs union with NAFTA? And if a customs union is what makes a difference, why don't I move into then a different concept, which will be integration with the United States and Canada as a common market, as a union like the European Union. Well, but the more you read what she says, she really is telling you all over the piece, okay? And this is not too many pages. You only have to read about 25 pages, okay? Questions like this. A free trade agreement is a preferential arrangement in which tariff rates among members are zero, although external tariffs may be at different rates from different members of the arrangement. Okay? What is the meaning of that? You're an enterprise, you want to work in that area. What is the meaning of that? What is the meaning of that for you as an enterprise?
For example, in NAFTA, I'm going and I'm coming to Mexico to make my factory. The parts I bring from India have a different tariff that if I'm in Canada.
So,
the customs union, it wouldn't be like that.
okay. So if in my production process, what is very important for me is to bring the input from India, where am I going to be putting my plant if Canada has a tariff of 20%, Mexico has a tariff of 30%, and the United States has a tariff of 10%. Which one? Okay, so this is a reality of a free trade zone, yeah? If it were a customs union, what should be the tariff vis-a-vis India? This is a nice question for exam, okay?
They have 1%.
What is the principle that we just mentioned right a little while ago?
Article 24.
I'm sorry?
Article 24. So we have to take the lowest one because if not, it will be worse.
So what will be the tariff? This is what you will have to do in the exam, okay? You have to think about these things. So which one is that one?
10%.
Okay. So if I go into that, I'm going to have now a 10% tariff. Okay. Question then. Whereas before, as a company, I was biased by the tariff system to invest in the country with the lowest tariff, what happens now? They all have the same tariff, and therefore it's 10%, and therefore this now is neutral in terms of my decision-making process of where to invest. Okay? Where am I going to invest in then? In that country where I will be able to get the whole process at the lowest possible cost. Because once I produce in that country, I can export to the other two free of any tariffs or restrictions. Okay? So the whole concept of a free trade area is inferior in that sense to the concept of the customs union. That's what the article of this lady is saying. Okay? And this is the reason. Because what this does it creates different incentives inside the economy of each country, depending on whether they have a common or different tariffs and other restrictions. So the whole article of this woman is telling you, look, if you're going to be doing these things, you have to think about these elements, not only in terms of the welfare effects that the economies use. Think of it as an enterprise. If you're an enterprise, what would you prefer? You would prefer that those countries have a common union, customs union, than a free trade. The problem is they probably won't do that. They probably will be easier for them to go into this. Because if they go into a common tariff, what is it that they are doing? Look at this example. Whose tariff are we implementing? So this country and this country had to abide by the tariff decision of this country. In terms of trade theory, that implies I lost sovereignty because I had to follow the rule of the other country. Okay? And that's why it become political also.
Customs union is as solid as a free trade agreement?
Mm-hmm. But it's more complicated because it demands that you give away one thing which is called my policy vis-a-vis the rest of the world. Okay? And so what's going to happen is, in automatic, each and every country will have to go to the lowest tariff in the system. Okay? Once they do that, companies which had set shop because of the protection they were getting in a particular country will find an erosion of their facilities. From that moment on, you have tremendous pressure in your country to say, wait, let's not do that. Let's go for a free trade agreement, okay? And that's the reason why now you have more and more free trade agreements rather than more and more customs unions. Okay? This is what the article will say to you, okay? So what I wanted to do is to read it in that sense, thinking about what it means, okay? Furthest up the scale of integration is a single market in which all producers and consumers, okay, within the arrangement are governed by the same rules, in the sense that the participant in the geographic part of the market may not be prevented from operating another part of the market. So what we're talking about is a single market. But this is quite different, okay? You're going to have a single market, you have to have a single market for inputs and outputs. Because otherwise it doesn't make sense. But we have in a free trade area a single market for goods, but not a single market for inputs. Because in NAFTA, I'm not allowed labor mobility. Okay? And so one of the biggest problems I'm facing is this doesn't move right. The more you read these things, you have to think that way. What will be the kind of enterprise that you will have to set up then? What will be the conditions for that enterprise? Okay? So let me go back to this. On the third question, what kind of regional trade agreements are we finding? Well, let's look at this article of John Crawford, okay? For whatever reason, the other one I couldn't. First, for most countries, RTAs have become the centerpiece of their commercial policy. So what's happening is many countries are being forced to get into this. Yeah, because if I am Mexico, okay, and I'm trading with many countries, and then all of a sudden the United States makes an agreement with Canada and makes an agreement with China, and that agreement is a free trade agreement, I find something which is terrible to me, okay? Because I'm being excluded of all these benefits. And therefore, I'm pushed to think about how can I make the same kind of agreements. And so as countries began putting together free trade zones, other countries had to think, what do I do to improve my situation? Two factors are pushing this. One factor is the market condition. Yeah? I want to be in that market. I want to participate. I want to be part of that. But the second one really is you also have a production process that will be important for you. And so as I integrate in my chain, more and more I will be interested in having this type of agreements. Because as a company, I want to make sure that I can bring the inputs from one place, produce them, sell in the other place. Okay? So I am going to be doing more and more the centerpiece of my political trade policy, preferential trade agreements, regional trade agreements, free trade agreements. As the internal politics push me, I know that it is more difficult to do it in a customs union than in a free trade agreement. Because I have to give away sovereignty. And my constituency does not allow that. So the point that they are making here is most countries now have a centerpiece of their commercial policy, regional trade agreements, for geographical reasons, for many reasons. Second, regional trade agreements are now showing more and more increased level of sophistication. Many of the new ones include liberalization of trade in services. The regulatory regimes extend to trade policy areas not regulated multilaterally, and their outreach in terms of partners is becoming both innovative and not geographically bound. So here we have Mexico negotiating with Japan. Completely different concept, okay? And so I'm moving different. Third, the geopolitics of RTAs indicates an increase in North-South RTAs. Remember what the article of Van Kruger said? Developing nations, that was what's called South-South, North-North. More and more what is becoming now is North-South. And as you have emerging economies becoming important in world trade, you are going to have more and more what is called North-South regional trade agreements. Okay? So geography is not really becoming important. What's becoming important is economics and the things that I can get as an enterprise from these combinations. The fourth trend has been a process of expansion and consolidation of regional integration schemes characterized by the consolidation of an increasing number of intra-regional RTAs into continent-wide regional trading blocks. Think about a region. You have this, you have a block which is Canada, the USA, and Mexico. Okay? And if you go down there, in South America, you have Mercosur, which is 4 countries. Now they included Venezuela. And you have also the Andean Pact, and you have other pacts. It's becoming more and more regional. And the pressure is for these countries to try to reach some South American agreement, yeah? Because what we're having here is a North American agreement. Oh, well, now we have a small place here called Central America. And they need to also integrate themselves. And we have all these little islands, which are the Caribbean. And the idea was originally, we take everything, and we make what was called the free trade of the Americas. Okay, continent-wide.
The Mercosur is 6 countries.
Which one? Sorry?
6 countries.
Mercosur is right now, if I'm not mistaken, 5. Okay.
Paraguay was excluded.
Who?
Paraguay.
Is Paraguay, Uruguay, they are there even if they have been suspended, okay?
Okay.
It's Paraguay, Uruguay, Argentina, and Brazil.
And Bolivia is.
They now accepted Venezuela. I'm not sure, Bolivia is already
Yeah,
included?
Venezuela was in 2005.
Okay. Then you have 6. And you have Chile as an observer. Okay? And, oh, by the way, Mexico is also part of Mercosur as an observer, of course. And we were observing all the time. So it was really funny. But what you have, is Bolivia now accepted in the Mercosur? No. No, Bolivia is not in the Mercosur. I'll check, but honestly, you caught me in that one, but I don't think that Bolivia is part. They may be as an observer, but they are not part of the bloc.
I was checking in the page. It was it was a formality, but Bolivia is included.
Yeah, because they may attend the meetings as an observer also, and they may be negotiating But well, I'll check, okay? And you check also. I'm almost positive they are not yet members of, full right members. Paraguay is, but it's been suspended because of the political situation, okay? But it is a member. So once a new president is elected in a way that...
It was in 2013, maybe in April or March, they will return to Paraguay.
We'll see. What are the characteristics of these things? Okay, so these are the characteristics. And here you have the three things which are important. You have these notifications of the RTAs include under GATT Article 24, GATS, which is the Agreement on Trade and Services, Trade and Services, Article 5, and what is called the Enabling Clause. These three has to be fulfilled, okay? So you keep reading the article and it will tell you things, okay? It will tell you how many of these are. As of December 2006, 367. Okay? 214 are in force. That means the other ones are not really working. How could you have 367 when there is only 190 countries?
Because of the spaghetti problem.
Okay? And that's the whole point of Baguati. The whole point of Baguati is, look, as you start doing these things, then you have a real mess because you have more agreements than countries, which implies that there must be a lot of lines that start affecting each other. That's what he calls the spaghetti ball effect, okay? And as we saw in the last class, you saw the spaghetti ball right there. Look at what it says here. Out of the total, 158 cover trading goods, 43 trading services, and the remaining 13 are accessions to existing RTAs, either goods or services. Okay? And that implies that as you get into this process, you get more and more into a mess. This is the graph I show you as part of the course. Okay, there you have it. There you have the notification to GATT from 48 to the year 2006. There you have the GATT's previous to the WTO and post-WTO. Remember, GATT was in vigor from 1947 to 1995. Then they finally normalized and created WTO, which has been from 95 to 2013 right now. So there's a pre and post. FTAs account for 84% of all RTAs notified, CUs only 8%. Okay? So if roughly we have 400, we have 32 customs unions. And the rest basically are free trade agreements. As you read this article, it gives you the answer then and says, look at the kind of evolution and the typology that you can see. Okay? It says, customs unions share the FTA's objective of comprehensive trade liberalization among the parties. However, the formation is driven by policy objectives that, together with their configuration requirements, severely limit the flexibility as a trade policy instrument compared to FTAs. What is the meaning of severely limits? It's sovereignty, okay? As I go into a more complex process, I lose sovereignty. And as I lose sovereignty, I am going to be less flexible in what I should be imposing. I can have, I can have 3 different tariffs, 1 free trade. But if I go into customs union, I only have 1 tariff. Okay? It's less flexible for me. I can maintain protection in certain things that I want for my economy vis-a-vis third parties. If I go into customs union, I cannot do that. It has to be the same for everybody vis-a-vis third parties. It's less flexible, okay? As you look at all these things, read in the article, okay, what you will be seeing more and more is this concept. Is the concept that you get more and more things. Another significant aspect of this proliferation is the emergence of atypical RTAs configurations. The simple bilateral, two countries, and plurilateral configurations are being supplemented by agreements in which one of the parties is in itself an RTA. The European Union, negotiating with, okay, they are an RTA, regional trade agreement, and they negotiate as a bloc. They don't negotiate country by country. They cannot do that. And so more and more you are getting these concepts, okay, where bilaterals RTAs, where each party is a distinct RTA. Mercosur with the European Union. Mercosur with NAFTA. That will be the kind of block to block. No longer country by country, block to block. As they keep creating more RTAs, we are negotiating more and more RTA with RTA. Okay. Not country with country. And that would make more sense, by the way. The whole ideal thing would be, okay, look, if you're going to go into that, don't do this RTA here and then a country being part of another RTA which is different. No? Okay. Okay, this is how you have to read these articles. You have to read them, okay? These are not suggested readings, remember. And then, of course, the deepening of integration. How do we answer that? Well, look at this article. I mean, maybe you think that I give you the article just for fun, but look. And this is very simple. It's only 5 pages, okay? What these guys say is, over the last 3 decades, there has been an increased role of international production networks. Companies are creating international production networks, okay? In the global economy, which are characterized by the unbundling of stages of production across borders. International production networks have evolved due to technological innovation in communication and transportation. What we saw about Boeing is happening all over the world, okay? That has not only decreased physical distance, but has also facilitated the establishment of services links necessary for the efficient combination of various fragments of the production process. So the trade is not only a thing of what I produce and I sell. Trade is becoming a question of, as a company, how can I minimize costs? And as I do that, trade is becoming intra-trade. Intra-trade is not among different companies. It's the same company establishing shop in many places and then bringing inputs from one country and creating product in another country. As they do that, trade is becoming a different animal. And you, as people who will be working in international businesses, have to understand that. Many of the decision processes will be because it will allow me to be more competitive. As a general rule, but also more competitive in certain markets that I want to penetrate. And therefore, all my decisions as a company are changing. As my decisions as a company are changing, I need to make sure that the rules of the game are in synchrony with what I'm planning to do. Because as I mentioned in the first classes, if all of a sudden a president of any country decides, just because that morning he woke up on the right side rather than the left side of the bed, that he wants to impose controls, then I am in trouble. Okay? Well, it happens. And one of the problems that we are looking at right now with trade is exactly that situation. Yes?
Why NAFTA was so criticized?
NAFTA was criticized because we lost, in many ways, industries and companies that had been protected for years. Okay? So the Mexican process of development and industrialization, the creation of the manufacturing sector in Mexico, starts in the years 40s of the last century. Okay? As the Mexican governments think about development and they think about growth, they think about industrialization as a process of growth. So what they do is they create conditions, protection to that industry. And there are two rules they will impose. One of them is you want to sell your car in Mexico, you have to have a factory in Mexico. Those cars which are not created that way will not be sold in Mexico. Or they will pay an enormous tariff, etc. Basically, they were forbidden. You could not bring a car which was not produced in Mexico. Okay? So the process of industrialization of Mexico takes place through that condition, and that's called protectionism. So you create protectionism. As you create protectionism, you create very inefficient industries. As you create very inefficient industries, when you go into an opening of your economy, many of those are going to go bankrupt. Okay? So what you have is a tremendous reaction against it. If you look at also the agricultural sector, you can see two parts of the agricultural sector. One part is the very productive part, where irrigation takes place, by the way, and you have all these big products for export. But then you have the large majority of the Mexican agricultural sector in the production of grains, corn, beans. And as you do that, you have a protected sector, which at the same time, politically speaking, is a very important sector for the party in power at the time, which is back today. But that party had as part of its structure, and still does, something called the CNSA, National Confederation for Agriculture, the CROC, etc. So they have these groups. One of them, the most important at the time, we're talking the time of Lázaro Cárdenas, okay? 30s of last century. They are really large political groups that support the government. As you open the economy to agricultural products, you are going to have a problem because that large proportion of population is going to be going against you. Now, obviously, what's happening right now with this agricultural sector of ours is many people are leaving into the United States. So we have 9 million people in the United States which are undocumented and which have a problem there, which is they were supposed to be working in the agricultural area in Mexico, they're working somewhere else. So the key question is, well, what do we have? Well, we have a lot of legislation in Mexico which goes against opening the agricultural sector, particularly in certain areas like sugar, corn, etc. All of those were being reduced. As they were doing that, you had a tremendous reaction from those groups against the opening of the economy. And they will use a very good argument, sovereignty. Food is important. What happens if we don't have food? We're going to be subject to whatever the United States decides because they're the ones who sent corn to Mexico. So the more you look at all these things, the more you're going to be seeing the process of deepening, which is called that way. Okay? Because as this graph indicates to you, this is the depth, by depth meaning how many other things you put in there, not only goods, services, investment, rules, etc. And look at what happens between 80 and 90, 90 and 2000, 2000, 2007, the depth of each one of these PTAs has increased. Meaning with that, as the production network trade, the intra-trade increases, the more you see as a reflection of that, the inclusion in the negotiations of other aspects, not only goods, not only services, but also norms, rules of behavior. Okay? So this article really tells you how this thing is happening. And it's a very simple article because it's 5 pages, okay? You have to read it. Yes. The concept of integration is widely used to refer to any arrangement that goes beyond a simple free trade area. Okay. The first dimension, the extensive margin, refers to an increase in the coverage of an agreement beyond the lowering of tariffs. And the second dimension, the intensive margin, refers to the institutional depth of the agreement, such as the extent to which certain policy privileges are delegated to supranational entities. Example given, the formation of customs union. What you have here in this table is what they call the WTO in and out. So it says the first group is represented by WTO plus, provisions that fall under the current mandate of WTO and are already subject to some form of commitment WT agreements. The second group of policy areas, which are denoted WT minus X, provisions refer to obligations that are outside the current mandate. So look what's happening right now. This is what you negotiate when you go multilateral. This is what you negotiate when you go plurilateral. Okay? And look at the subjects that are included now. Anti-corruption, health issues, competition policy, human rights, environmental laws, illegal immigration, investment, illicit drugs, industrial cooperation, labor market, information society, this is TIs, movement of capital, mining, etc., etc., etc. Look at this. This is what we are negotiating now, every time we sit. Why? Because if I am a company, I'm very interested in what is going to be the situation of protection for civilians, what is going to be regional cooperation and the help we are going to give, blah, blah, blah. Regional cooperation was a very important aspect of the European Union. These are the famous solidarity funds, okay? The funds that the community, the countries in the north will give the south to integrate. Many of the big boom that you have in Spain, Portugal, these countries, was because it was a big donation, if you want to put it that way, resource transfer of money for roads and everything else. Because one of the points that was made is, you cannot have an economy that will integrate to my economy unless they have also the facilities, the resources, the roads that we have. Because otherwise, I'm integrating countries which will come with a big disadvantage. And so, there, many of these, you have to understand that, because I really, for years, I felt very, very frustrated that young people in Mexico will look at Spain and say, look at that, yeah, sure. If the United States is willing to give Mexico the amount of money that the European countries of the north gave the European countries of the south for the infrastructure development that they require, we will also have been even bigger and better than Spain. I have no doubt about that. You can see it today, okay? Most of the growth that we had in these southern countries was because of this transfer of resources from the northern countries. You had a tremendous boom. And it made a lot of sense because I wanted to have the same roads. Otherwise, it wouldn't make sense. They will be uncompetitive simply because they didn't have the infrastructure. So I supported the development of infrastructure. Okay, so you will look at this because that's really what it means. These are the points of what it means deepening, okay? And then, of course, we went through the last part. These are the official things, and I'm going to give it to you, so I'm not going to go through it. This is the enable clause. This is the Article 24, what it means, okay? So you can have it. And this is the Article 5 of GATS. These are the three articles that define the concept of why and how you can make this within the rules of WTO. Now, I can assure you, many people probably are not following the rules of WTO anyway, but because WTO doesn't have the capacity to supervise. But basically, people have to agree and accept these rules as part of how they can make a PTA or an RTA. And then we have what we talked last time, linear market integration and the perceived loss of sovereignty are the two major problems of integration. And I showed you this last time. This is the linear way of integration, okay? I go from a preferential trade area to a free trade area to a customs union to a common market to an economic union and to a political union. And as I do that, see what's happening with this. This is where the European Union is stuck right now. These were easy, a little bit more difficult. This has become very complex for them, but this, they have trouble. Because now what you are telling them is, look, you really want to be my friend? You have the Maastricht Agreement that says that you have the obligation of 3% of GDP deficit of the public accounts, okay? But right now they're all 9, 7, 6%. So none of them is really fulfilling the Maastricht criteria. Worse than that, they lied. They kept telling that they were 3%. Well, the other day someone asked me, how could you do that? And I said, it was very simple. I'm going to build a building. Okay? You can call it whatever, okay? This is a government building. I can do two things. Either I have the money in my pocket, or I have to get a loan, yeah? Governments usually don't have the money in their pocket, so what they will do is they will go for a loan. If they go for a loan, that's going to be registered as part of the deficit. And so they have to fulfill that number, 3% of GDP. But I really want to make more because I need that for political reasons. So what do? I go and I do public-private partnerships. That's how they are called nowadays. So I go with 3 nice owners of construction companies, or one if you like, only one, whoever. And you tell them, why don't we make a deal? You guys build this for me. Okay? So you're the ones who build. And what I'm going to do as government is I'm going to give you a commitment to rent the building for the next 40 years at X. That will give you a return of approximately 15%. Do you want to do that for me or not? Okay, if you put your money into any product right now, we'll give you 5%, 8%, 10%. Okay? I'm in the board of a bank that makes decisions on portfolio investments. And one of the things that's funny is you probably will get this amount, but it will be very, very risky. And if you're going to have this neutrality of risk and everything else, you probably will end up in 12%, 13%, 10% as current conditions. That's the top. If you want to be absolutely safe, you put everything in government bonds, which gives you 4.5, and that's it. So if you're an investor and you say, give me a break, you're telling me they're going to be 15%? Yeah, okay, let's make just a deal. I'm going to be signing with you a deal that will really put you in there. How long does any government in Mexico last? 6 years. Yeah? These are the big ones. I mean, the small ones, 3 years. 6 years. Give me then a 30 or 50-year contract. That implies I'm going to be putting the next 1, 2, 3, 4 administrations paying for this thing. But does it look as debt in my book now because I don't have the debt? Okay? If you want to put it that way, I'm just renting the place. So, through this mechanism, I can skip this control. This is good, isn't it? I mean, really nice. So, these are tricks. The making of the European Union, just for you. September 1946, Winston Churchill is the one who's talking about the United States of Europe. 51, Belgium, Germany, which by then, remember, it was split, okay? So the Federal Republic of Germany, France, Italy, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands signed what is called the Treaty of Paris, okay? Which is the first treaty that establishes the European coal and steel community. So see how the integration is linear. And by 1953, they have a common market for coal, iron ore, and scrap iron, and for steel in May. On March 1957, the 6 original parties, okay, agree with France, Italy, Luxembourg, Netherlands in the Treaty of Rome to create the European Economic Community. So this is, you're not international relations, but you're in business, so you need to know this. International business. Treaty of Paris, Treaty of Rome. Then I go into common regulations for a common market in agriculture, financial regulation, and competition. Then I go in 68, a customs union. 69, the European Community, as it's now known, agreed to work towards greater integration of a single EC market. An eventual monetary union was envisioned, as was the admission of new member states. It was agreed to open negotiations with Denmark, Ireland, Norway, and the United Kingdom. 72, a currency snake was set up. This is the beginning of the euro. We're going to have a currency snake, meaning all our exchange rates will be within a band, and none can go away from that band, okay? So in many ways, this is the first of the euro, because what you are doing is you are controlling how much can you really devalue or not your currency. It has to be within that snake, okay, that band. You enlarge it to 9 members. Custom duties between the 9 EC members completely abolished. 1978, the European Council meeting held at Bremen approved a plan to set up a European monetary system. In 79, elections to European Parliament. Okay? And then as you keep doing this, you go to the Maastricht Treaty. And you put the euro, and you put the countries that will be willing to adopt. Linear integration stages of this. I'm going to just skip these ones, okay? I'm going to say to you, these are the myths that are happening right now. Mature economies create jobs only in low pay, low value domestic services. This is a study, very interesting study by McKinsey, showing that, in fact, all of these are lies, okay? That is not happening the way people thought inside the countries. Why I put it there to you? Because this is the argument that you will hear from people in Mexico to go against more and more integration. And then, next class. Paola, Jose, y Ana Maria, okay? You are going to be working on a debate on the transformation of NAFTA into a union. And it's a debate. You will tell me why you think makes sense, why it doesn't, what are the constraints you will be facing, etc. So we're going to be sitting like you saw these guys around this. They will give you a microphone like mine so that you will be listened to. And of course, after we make a debate for about half an hour or whatever, so each one of you will have, you're not going to have the time to present, you're going to be reacting to questions I'm going to be asking, okay? I'm going to be asking, why do you think this is good, what is bad? And as you start saying things, I will say, oh, wait, explain this to us because we understand. After we finish this exercise, then we open the floor to questions from the audience, okay? These are the 3 people for NAFTA. So I'm answering a question of who was Andres, you asked me this one. You may come as dandy as some people do right now, or you can come.
Today,
Yeah, you have 2 more days, so you will be ready.
I will really prepare for it.
And then Mercosur, Andres, and Jocelyn are going to be the ones. Okay. Okay. So look at it correctly, because if you are wrong, I'm going to hit you with that one immediately. Okay? And you go to this. This is a debate for about 20, 25 minutes, and then 15 minutes or so, and then we go to the next group. Okay? And remember, we have our first partial exam February 27, and we'll include sections 1 and 2. Okay? We just basically are going to be finishing section 2 next class. Okay? No questions? See you then Friday.